Evan stared at the softly glowing screen of his battered laptop, his face lit by the pale bluish light as he absent-mindedly sipped at a mug of cold coffee. The hour was well past reasonable, 3:42 a.m. to be precise, and the world outside was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of wind against the blinds. The insomnia had been his companion for years, a shadowy presence he'd grown to accept like an unwelcome guest. It always started the same way, a casual search for obscure trivia or a new gadget review. It always ended with him wandering deeper and deeper into the internet's murky depths. But tonight was different. His cursor hovered over a peculiar hyperlink tucked at the bottom of a shady tech forum he'd found purely by accident. The link glimmered faintly, like an invitation whispered to no one in particular. Galactic Market. Rethink the possible. Evan frowned. It had to be a scam. Websites like this weren't exactly rare. He'd stumbled across dozens of them in his digital meanderings. But there was something oddly compelling about the minimalist text and its air of restrained absurdity. His tired brain whispered that it would be harmless to take a peek. After all, what could possibly happen? With a wry grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, Evan clicked. The page loaded with a seamless animation, as though peeling back a layer of reality itself. The interface was sleek and mesmerizing, hues of deep violet and shimmering silver playing across the screen in fluid waves. The title banner read, "Welcome to the Galactic Market. The universe is at your fingertips." Beneath it was an array of categories, everything from universal energy solutions to exotic life forms. It was ridiculous. It had to be a joke. Evan chuckled softly, more to break the unnerving quiet of his apartment than anything else, and clicked on the category labeled Exotic Life Forms. The next page loaded with startling clarity, displaying a scrolling gallery of bizarre creatures, floating orbs with crystalline appendages, enormous slug-like beings with bioluminescent patterns and— "Wait, what?" Evan muttered under his breath, leaning closer to the screen. The image on his screen showed what looked like a tall, humanoid figure, a woman if her silhouette was anything to go by. Her skin gleamed with a faint iridescence, catching the light in a way that didn't seem entirely natural. Her eyes, even in a still image, radiated an otherworldly glow. Beneath the photo, the description read, "Companion Class Alien Woman, fully customizable, adaptive to your lifestyle and preferences, satisfaction guaranteed." Evan blinked. The page felt surreal, as if he were teetering on the edge of a dream. Companion Class Alien Woman? What was this? A high-concept prank? A black market VR game? His thoughts swirled as his cursor danced over the Order Now button. He hesitated. Something about it all felt wrong. But the absurdity of it gnawed at him, that maddening itch of curiosity he couldn't resist scratching. "It's probably just a phishing scam," he reasoned aloud. "Worst case, I cancel my card in the morning." With a sheepish grin, he clicked. A loading animation spun for an agonizingly long 5 seconds before a confirmation window popped up. Order confirmed. Estimated delivery, immediate. Evan chuckled nervously. Immediate delivery, sure. What? Is Amazon using teleportation now? Shaking his head, he closed the laptop and leaned back, trying to ignore the faint tingle of unease crawling up his spine. It was a joke. Had to be. The next morning broke with a brightness that felt almost accusatory. Evan stirred groggily in bed, sunlight streaming through the half-closed blinds. He groaned, stretched, and shuffled to the kitchen, where the smell of stale coffee greeted him like an old adversary. His phone buzzed on the counter, but he ignored it, instead pouring himself another mug of liquid mediocrity. That's when he heard it. A low, resonant hum, like the purring of a colossal machine, vibrated through the walls of his small house. It wasn't coming from inside, but outside. Evan froze, the mug halfway to his lips. The sound grew louder, tinged with a metallic whine that sent shivers crawling down his spine. Heart pounding, he set the mug down and crept to the window. Peeling back the curtain, he caught sight of something impossible. A sleek metallic ship hovered above his backyard, its surface gleaming like polished mercury. It was small, about the size of a moving van, but its design was unlike anything Evan had ever seen. No seams, no rivets, just a seamless, otherworldly perfection. "What the hell?" he whispered, his breath fogging the glass. Before he could process the sight, a hatch hissed open and a figure descended from the craft. She moved with fluid precision, her posture elegant and unnervingly poised. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if reflecting a light that wasn't entirely present, and her eyes glowed with a soft, unearthly hue. She wore a form-fitting suit that seemed to pulse faintly with energy, its intricate designs flowing like liquid circuitry. Evan stumbled back from the window, his mind racing. No, this can't be real. The woman, or alien, his mind screamed, approached the house with measured steps. As she neared the door, Evan heard a soft chime, a sound he didn't recognize but felt deep in his chest, as though the air itself had harmonized. The doorbell rang. Evan froze. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing heavily. "Evan Carter," a voice called, smooth and melodic, yet tinged with a strange metallic resonance. "This is your scheduled delivery. May I enter?" Evan's knees threatened to buckle. His scheduled delivery. He didn't respond. Couldn't. The voice spoke again, gentler this time. "Evan Carter, please confirm receipt. I am Lysara, your assigned companion." His world tilted. Evan sat stiffly on his threadbare couch, the floral pattern worn to a faded memory of its former self. Across from him, perched with unnerving stillness on the edge of an armchair, was Lysara. Her shimmering skin caught the weak morning sunlight streaming through the blinds, creating subtle rainbows that danced across the walls. The silence in the room was palpable. Evan's mind churned with a dozen competing thoughts, none of which made sense. He was sure he'd wake up at any moment, groggy and relieved, the whole ordeal dissolving like morning mist. But every time he pinched himself, the sharp sting reminded him this was no dream. Lysara tilted her head slightly, her luminous eyes fixed on him. "Evan Carter," she began, her voice calm and precise. "You appear distressed. May I offer assistance?" "Assistance?" Evan repeated, his voice cracking slightly. He laughed, though it sounded hollow in his ears. "Yeah, you could assist me by explaining what the hell is going on." She blinked, a slow and deliberate motion. "Your request was processed through the Galactic Market's secure fulfillment system. I was dispatched as per standard protocol. I am here to serve in accordance with your preferences." "My preferences?" Evan felt his stomach twist. He didn't remember selecting preferences, didn't even remember there being an option for it. "Look, there's been some kind of mistake. I didn't actually mean to." "Your actions initiated a binding agreement," Lysara interrupted, though her tone was devoid of judgment. "Once finalized, such agreements cannot be rescinded without substantial cause. The galactic market operates under strict compliance with interstellar trade regulations." Evan stared at her, the words washing over him like a wave he couldn't quite grasp. Galactic market. Interstellar trade regulations. None of this should have been real, and yet here she was, an alien woman sitting in his living room, calmly explaining the fine print of a cosmic contract he didn't know he'd signed. Lysara shifted slightly, her movements graceful and precise. "Shall I activate my adaptive subroutines to better integrate with your environment? My systems are capable of optimizing for compatibility with your cultural and personal preferences." "No," Evan said, a little too loudly. He winced at his own outburst and softened his tone. "Number, just stay like you are, okay? I need to figure this out." Lysara regarded him for a moment, then gave a small, measured nod. "As you wish." Hours later, the initial shock had ebbed, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that gnawed at the edges of Evan's mind. He sat at his desk, his laptop glowing faintly as he dove into the Galactic Markets website. Now that the absurdity of the situation had sunk in, his focus shifted to unraveling the mechanics of what he'd stumbled into. The interface was maddeningly complex, the text shifting subtly as if it were alive. Each click seemed to open 3 new windows, cascading into an endless labyrinth of categories, subcategories, and cryptic terms of service. The help and support section was a cruel joke, an automated system that spat out generic responses laced with jargon he didn't understand. Cancellation policies are subject to multidimensional arbitration, Evan read aloud, his voice dripping with disbelief. What does that even mean? Behind him, Lysara stood quietly, her posture as unyielding as ever. If you are attempting to nullify our contract, I must inform you that the Galactic Markets arbitration processes are prohibitively complex for most buyers. Evan spun in his chair, glaring at her. You're not helping. I was not attempting to, she replied evenly, though there was the faintest hint of amusement in her tone. Evan sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Okay, fine. Then help me understand. Why does this place even exist? Who makes a marketplace for... He gestured vaguely at her. You know people. Lysara hesitated, a flicker of something, uncertainty, passing across her face. The galactic market caters to a diverse clientele across numerous star systems. Its offerings are varied, and its practices, though not universally condoned, are protected under the trade accords of Caladrith Prime. That's not an answer, Evan snapped. She paused, then nodded. No, it is not. Evan slumped back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing down on him. His life had been simple, mundane even. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Now he was sitting in the middle of some cosmic trade scandal, his backyard hosting a spaceship like it was a parked car, and his only guide through the madness was an alien woman who seemed just as much a mystery as the situation itself. As the day wore on, Evan's anxiety gave way to a cautious curiosity. He found himself watching Lysara more closely, noting the way her cybernetics pulsed faintly with each movement, the way her gaze lingered on objects in his house as though trying to decode their purpose. At one point, she stopped in front of a framed photo on the wall, a younger Evan, arms slung around the shoulders of 2 friends he hadn't seen in years. Lysara tilted her head. Are these companions of yours? She asked. Evan glanced up from his laptop. Friends, he corrected. Old friends. We don't really talk anymore. Lysara studied the photo for a moment longer. Companionship appears to hold significant value in your culture. Evan snorted. Yeah, well, people are complicated. They don't always stick around. She didn't respond, but something in her posture shifted, an almost imperceptible tension. Evan frowned, filing the observation away in the back of his mind. That night, as Evan sat on the couch with his laptop balanced precariously on his knees, Lysara approached him with a quiet grace. She held a small metallic device in her hands, its surface gleaming with a faint inner light. What's that? Evan asked warily. A base node, Lysara explained. It is a multifunctional system designed to enhance my integration with your environment. Shall I activate it? Evan hesitated. What does it do exactly? It provides support functions, including environmental adaptation, data processing, and communication enhancements. Communication with who? Lysara paused. Primarily with you. Secondarily, with external systems, should the need arise. Evan's instincts screamed at him to refuse, but something in Lysara's calm demeanor made him pause. This was her world, not his. Maybe understanding her technology was the first step to making sense of everything. Fine, he said reluctantly. Go ahead. The device came to life with a faint hum, its surface shifting like liquid metal as it unfolded into a sleek console. Symbols danced across its interface, their meaning inscrutable. Lysara placed her hand on the device, and for a moment, The room seemed to hum with an energy Evan couldn't quite place. "Integration complete," she said, stepping back. Evan stared at the console, equal parts awed and unnerved. This was only the beginning, he realized. Whatever he'd gotten himself into, it went far deeper than he'd imagined. Evan sat at the kitchen table, his head resting in his hands as the events of the past 24 hours replayed in his mind. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, once a comforting background noise, now grated on his nerves. He felt like a man caught between two worlds, the familiar monotony of his quiet life and the incomprehensible chaos that had landed, quite literally, on his doorstep. Across from him, Lysara stood by the sleek console she had activated earlier. The base node was eerily silent, yet its surface glimmered with symbols that flowed like liquid light, too alien for Evan to comprehend. Lysara's expression was unreadable as she studied the display. "Evan Carter," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the stillness. He looked up, startled. "What?" "There has been an anomaly," she said, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "The galactic market's tracking systems indicate an unauthorized signal originating from this location." Evan blinked. "An unauthorized what?" "A signal," Lysara repeated. "Encrypted, but unmistakably linked to the galactic market's network. Such activity is highly irregular." "Well, I didn't do it," Evan said defensively, his pulse quickening. "I barely know how to work my microwave, let alone send some encrypted alien signal." Lysara turned to him, her expression calm but tinged with an undertone of urgency. "The signal could indicate external interference. If so, it suggests we are no longer alone in this matter." Evan's stomach dropped. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "What does that mean? Is someone watching us?" "It is a possibility," Lysara said, her tone steady. "The galactic market's operations, while vast, are not without opposition. Unauthorized access to its systems often attracts attention from both official enforcers and less reputable entities." "Great," Evan muttered, rubbing his temples. "So now I've got interstellar spies or bounty hunters or whatever after me? All because I clicked the wrong link?" Lysara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned back to the console, her fingers moving with fluid precision over its surface. The symbols shifted rapidly, pulsing with a faint rhythmic glow. After a moment, she said, "The signal is faint but persistent. Its source appears to be triangulating this location. We have limited time before its originator arrives." Evan's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Lysara straightened, her posture as composed as ever. "Prepare. If an adversary arrives, we must be ready to neutralize the threat." "Neutralize?" Evan repeated, his voice rising an octave. "I don't know how to fight alien bounty hunters." Lysara regarded him with an almost imperceptible tilt of her head. "Your involvement in direct confrontation is not required. I am equipped to handle such engagements." "Fantastic," Evan said, pacing now. "Just fantastic. My life was boring yesterday, boring and predictable, and now I'm—" He gestured wildly, at a loss for words. "Now I'm in the middle of some cosmic mess I don't even understand." Lysara's gaze softened, if only slightly. "You are not alone in your predicament," she said quietly. "My presence here was not of my choosing either." Her words gave Evan pause. For a moment, the frustration bubbling inside him faltered. He glanced at her, noting the faint tension in her posture, the way her hands, usually so steady, rested just a little too stiffly on the console. "Yeah," he said after a long silence. "I guess we're both in over our heads." The first sign of trouble came just after sunset. Evan was in the living room, nervously scrolling through his phone in search of answers that didn't exist, when a low, resonant hum filled the air. It was similar to the sound of Lysara's arrival, but deeper, more menacing. He froze, his blood turning cold. "Lysara?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. She appeared almost instantly, her movements sharp and purposeful. "Stay here," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. Evan nodded, his throat dry. He watched as Lysara approached the window, her glowing eyes narrowing as she peered outside. "What is it?" he managed to ask. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed her hand to the window pane, her cybernetic implants flaring faintly. "A vessel has landed nearby," she said at last. "Its design does not match standard galactic market transport units." Evan's stomach churned. "Is that bad?" "Unclear," Lysara replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. A sudden, sharp knock at the front door made them both jump. Evan's pulse skyrocketed. He looked at Lysara, who was already moving toward the door with calculated precision. Her movements were fluid, but there was a tension to her steps, a readiness for whatever was on the other side. "Wait!" Evan hissed, grabbing her arm. "What if it's dangerous?" Her glowing eyes met his. "It likely is." Before he could protest further, Lysara opened the door. Standing on the threshold was a figure cloaked in shadow, its features obscured by a hood that seemed to ripple with an unnatural darkness. The air around it seemed to vibrate, carrying a faint metallic tang that set Evan's teeth on edge. The figure stepped forward, and Evan caught a glimpse of its face, or what passed for a face. It was humanoid, but its skin was a mottled obsidian black, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. "Lysara," it said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to bypass the ears entirely, resonating instead in the chest. "You have deviated from protocol." Lysara didn't flinch. "State your business." The figure tilted its head slightly, the motion unnervingly slow. "The product has been flagged. Retrieval is required." Evan's breath caught. "Product?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Lysara's expression hardened. "I am not a product." The figure's glowing eyes narrowed. "You were sold. The terms are binding." Before Evan could fully process the exchange, Lysara moved. In a blur of motion, she struck out, her hand colliding with the figure's chest. The impact sent it staggering backward, but it recovered quickly, its movements unnaturally fluid. "Evan," Lysara called, her voice sharp, "get to cover." He didn't need to be told twice. Scrambling toward the kitchen, he ducked behind the counter, his heart hammering in his chest. From his hiding spot, he heard the sounds of the struggle, thuds, crashes, and an otherworldly hum that made the air vibrate. For the first time, Evan realized just how far out of his depth he truly was. The night pressed heavily against the small house, its stillness fractured by the faint hum of Lysara's bass node and the quiet, labored breathing of Evan. He sat on the floor behind the overturned couch, his knees pulled to his chest, while Lysara stood sentinel by the shattered front door. The figure that had attacked was gone, leaving behind only faint scorch marks on the hardwood floor and the acrid tang of alien tech. Evan's hands trembled as he hugged himself tighter. He hadn't spoken much since the fight, his mind too tangled with shock and fear to form coherent thoughts. The house felt alien now, the air thick with tension and a lingering sense of violation. Lysara turned to him, her movements measured and deliberate. Her glowing eyes softened slightly as she regarded him. "You are unharmed?" Evan nodded numbly, though his heart still thundered in his chest. What the hell was that thing?" "An enforcer," Lysara said simply. Evan blinked. "An enforcer for who?" "The galactic market," she replied. "Its primary function is to retrieve assets deemed compromised." "Assets?" Evan's voice cracked. "You mean you?" Lysara hesitated, the faintest flicker of something, shame, crossing her face. "In their eyes, yes. My deviation from protocol marks me as expendable." Evan stared at her, struggling to reconcile the composed, almost regal figure before him with the reality of her words. "They'd just scrap you? Like some defective gadget?" She didn't answer immediately, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. "The galactic market does not tolerate inefficiency." The words hung in the air like a curse. Evan swallowed hard, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't untangle. But before he could speak again, the bass note emitted a sharp, piercing tone that made both of them flinch. Lysara moved to the console instantly, her hands dancing across its surface. Symbols flickered and pulsed, their light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "What is it now?" Evan asked, his voice shaking. Lysara's expression darkened. "The signal has been reactivated." Evan's blood ran cold. "I thought you stopped it." "I did," she said, her tone clipped. "But this is not the same transmission. It is originating from within the house." Evan froze. "From here? How is that even possible?" Lysara's glowing eyes narrowed as she turned her attention to the corner of the room. Without warning, she crossed the space in 3 swift strides and knelt by a small side table. Evan watched as she slid her fingers along the underside of the table's edge, her cybernetics glowing faintly. A soft click echoed through the room. "What did you find?" Evan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysara withdrew a small, disc-shaped device from the table's underside. It was sleek and metallic, its surface etched with faint, swirling patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "This," she said, holding it up for him to see, "is a tracking beacon." Evan's stomach dropped. "A what? How did that get here?" Lysara studied the device, her expression unreadable. It was placed deliberately. Its design suggests advanced cloaking capabilities, making it nearly undetectable to standard scans. Evan shook his head, his heart pounding. "But how? I didn't—" He stopped mid-sentence, a terrible realization dawning on him. His laptop. Scrambling to his feet, Evan bolted to the kitchen where his laptop sat on the counter. He grabbed it, frantically pulling up the Galactic Markets website. The screen flickered faintly as he navigated its labyrinthine interface, his fingers shaking with every click. "Evan," Lysara said sharply, appearing behind him, "what are you doing?" "It's the site," he said, his voice rising with panic. "The stupid website. I think it—" Before he could finish, the laptop screen went dark. Then, without warning, it flared to life again, displaying a single line of text in bold, pulsing letters. "Unauthorized access detected. Retrieval team dispatched." Evan stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh no, no, no." Lysara leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the text. Her jaw tightened. "We must leave immediately." 15 minutes later, Evan found himself sitting in the cockpit of Lysara's sleek, alien starship, his hands gripping the armrests as though his life depended on it, which, to be fair, it probably did. The ship hummed around him, its interior a seamless blend of metal and light. Lysara sat in the pilot's seat, her fingers moving deftly over an array of holographic controls. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. "No," Lysara replied bluntly, "but remaining stationary is worse." The ship jolted suddenly as it lifted off the ground, the acceleration pressing Evan back into his seat. Through the viewport, he watched as his house grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a speck in the darkness. "Where are we even going?" he asked. "Away," Lysara said. "Far enough to evade detection." Evan's stomach churned as the ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, the stars beyond gleaming with a cold, indifferent light. For the first time, he truly grasped the enormity of what was happening. He was leaving Earth, and he had no idea if he'd ever come back. As the ship hurtled through the void, Lysara worked tirelessly at the controls, her expression grim. Evan sat silently, his mind racing with questions. Finally, he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why didn't you tell me about the beacon?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. Lysara paused, her hands hovering over the console. "I did not know it existed." "How is that even possible? You're supposed to be some advanced thing. Shouldn't you have detected it?" Her jaw tightened. "I am not infallible, Evan, My systems were compromised when I was dispatched. It is likely the beacon was integrated during transit. Evan frowned. Compromised by who? Lysara hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. The galactic market, she said finally. Their methods are thorough. Evan stared at her, his frustration giving way to a sinking feeling in his gut. He had thought this was just some bizarre mix-up, an accidental purchase gone wrong, but now it was clear there was more to the story. Much more. And whatever it was, he had a feeling they were only scratching the surface. The starship hummed with a quiet intensity as it glided through the void, its every surface suffused with soft, pulsing light. Evan sat in the co-pilot's chair, his body slack, but his mind racing. He stared out at the stars streaking past, their cold brilliance mirrored in the sheen of sweat that glistened on his brow. He couldn't tear his thoughts away from the house he'd just left, the life he'd abandoned in an instant. The weight of his decisions made in panic, ignorance, and sheer desperation, pressed heavily on his chest. Lysara sat beside him, her posture taut and upright, her hands flitting over the holographic controls with practiced precision. Her glowing eyes, ever serene, now carried a flicker of urgency that Evan hadn't noticed before. "Where are we going?" he asked finally, his voice strained. Lysara didn't look at him. "A location beyond the galactic market's primary scan radius. A place where their reach is weaker." Evan frowned. "You're being vague again." "I am being cautious," she replied, her tone clipped. "There are few safe havens in this galaxy for one such as myself." Evan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So we're running blind into... what? A trap? Another ambush?" "Perhaps," Lysara said simply. Evan let out a sharp laugh, the sound tinged with hysteria. "That's reassuring." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's systems. Evan's mind churned, replaying the events that had led them here. He kept circling back to one question, a question he couldn't bring himself to ask. Finally, he turned to Lysara. "Why me?" She paused, her hands hovering over the console. "What do you mean? Why was I the one who ended up ordering you? Out of all the people in the galaxy, why did this happen to me?" Lysara's expression shifted, her features softening just slightly. "Your involvement was not intentional. The galactic market's algorithms are opportunistic. They target individuals deemed susceptible to their ploys." Evan bristled. "Susceptible? What does that mean?" "It means," she said slowly, "that you were identified as vulnerable, isolated, a perfect candidate to interact with their system without questioning its legitimacy." The words stung, cutting deeper than Evan wanted to admit. He looked away, his gaze falling to his trembling hands. "So I was just easy prey," he muttered bitterly. Lysara didn't answer, and her silence spoke volumes. Hours passed in relative quiet, the tension in the cockpit a living thing that neither of them could escape. Evan dozed fitfully in his chair, his dreams fractured and nonsensical, filled with flashes of alien faces and glowing symbols he couldn't understand. When he awoke, Lysara was still at the controls, her movements tireless. "Do you even sleep?" he asked groggily. "Rarely," she replied without turning. "Must be nice," Evan muttered, rubbing his eyes. Suddenly the ship shuddered violently, jolting him fully awake. The lights dimmed briefly, then flared back to life, casting erratic shadows across the cabin. "What the hell was that?" Evan exclaimed, gripping the armrests. Lysara's fingers flew over the controls, her expression grim. "We've been detected." Evan's stomach dropped. "Detected by who?" Before she could answer, a harsh mechanical voice crackled through the ship's comm system. "Unauthorized vessel. Power down immediately and prepare for boarding. Compliance is mandatory." Evan's heart pounded. "Oh no, oh no, no, no." Lysara cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Evan, listen to me. You must remain calm." "Calm?" he sputtered. "Did you hear that? They're going to board us." "I will handle it," she said firmly. "But no arguments," she snapped, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "If they breach the ship, your survival depends on remaining hidden. Do you understand?" Evan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Yeah, sure. Hide. Got it." The ship shuddered again as a metallic clank echoed through the hull. Evan crouched behind a storage panel, his knees drawn to his chest. He could hear the faint whir of approaching footsteps, each one sending a jolt of fear through his body. Lysara stood in the center of the cockpit, her posture radiating calm authority. The panel separating them hissed open, and 3 figures stepped inside. They were humanoid, but unnervingly sleek, their bodies encased in armor that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid metal. Their faces were featureless, save for a single glowing slit where their eyes should have been. "Designation, Lysara," one of them intoned, its voice cold and mechanical. "You are in violation of contract protocols. Surrender immediately." "I will not," Lysara replied, her voice steady. The lead figure tilted its head, the motion almost curious. "Resistance will result in termination." "Then terminate me," she said, her tone laced with defiance. The room erupted into chaos. Lysara moved like lightning, her cybernetics flaring with light as she engaged the intruders. Evan peeked out from his hiding spot, his breath catching as he watched her fight. Her movements were impossibly fast, almost graceful, as she dodged their attacks and countered with precise, devastating strikes. But it wasn't enough. One of the figures managed to land a blow, sending Lysara sprawling across the cockpit. She recovered quickly, but Evan could see the strain in her movements. "Evan!" she called out suddenly, her voice sharp and commanding. He froze. "What?" "Activate the failsafe." He blinked. "What failsafe?" "The panel behind you," she said urgently. "Do it now." Evan turned, his hands fumbling as he opened the panel she'd indicated. Inside was a small, glowing interface, its surface etched with symbols he didn't recognize. "What am I supposed to do?" he shouted, panic rising. "Press the center module," Lysara said, her voice strained. "It will disable the ship's tracking systems." Evan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the glowing interface. "But won't that—" "Do it!" she screamed. With a deep breath, Evan pressed the module. The effect was immediate. The ship shuddered violently as the lights flickered, then dimmed. The intruders froze, their movements suddenly jerky and uncoordinated. Lysara seized the opportunity, delivering a final, devastating blow that sent the lead figure crumpling to the floor. For a moment, there was silence. Then Lysara turned to Evan, her expression unreadable. "You've ensured our survival. For now." Evan stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "For now?" Lysara's gaze flickered to the viewport, where the faint outline of a massive looming structure could be seen in the distance. "We've only delayed the inevitable." The ship's hum had settled into an uneasy rhythm, like a heartbeat slowed by fear. Evan stood at the cockpit's edge, staring out at the enormous structure looming ahead. The darkened metal spires twisted and coiled into impossible forms, glowing faintly at their edges with pulses of cold alien light. This was no ordinary space station. It felt alive, predatory, as though it were watching them. Lysara worked the ship's controls, her movements precise, but visibly strained. Her shimmering skin glowed faintly, a telltale sign of her energy reserves depleting. She hadn't spoken since their narrow escape from the enforcers, but the air between them buzzed with unspoken tension. Finally, Evan broke the silence. "What is that thing?" Lysara didn't look up. "The Nexus Array. It is the Galactic Market's central command hub, a fortress and archive. It is where all their data and assets converge." Evan's stomach tightened. "And we're heading straight for it?" "Yes," she said simply. "Why? That's insane." Lysara paused, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "Because it is the only way to sever their hold. The beacon they placed on us, on me, was not just a means of tracking. It was a gateway. They can find us wherever we run unless we destroy the source. Evan stared at her, his mind racing. You're talking about taking down the galactic market? The whole thing? Yes, she said, her tone devoid of hesitation. He let out a hollow laugh, the sound ringing with disbelief. You make it sound so simple. It is not simple, Lysara replied. It is necessary. And the Nexus array grew larger in the viewport, its ominous spires now clearly visible. Evan could see smaller ships darting around its perimeter, like insects buzzing around a hive. His pulse quickened. How do you even plan to get in there? He asked. Lysara's fingers moved swiftly across the console, and the ship's lighting shifted to a dim reddish hue. I have secured access codes from my initial deployment. They are likely outdated, but should suffice to penetrate the first layer of defenses. And after that? Her gaze remained fixed on the controls. We improvise. Evan groaned, rubbing his temples. Great. Improvisation. That always ends well. As they approached the Nexus array, the ship's systems began to ping with warning signals. Lysara adjusted their trajectory, guiding the vessel into a narrow corridor of energy fields that shimmered with a faint, bluish glow. Hold on, she said, her voice calm but firm. What do you mean, hold? Before he could finish, the ship jolted violently, the sound of metal groaning under pressure filling the cabin. Evan clutched his seat, his knuckles white as he tried not to panic. What's happening? They are scanning us, Lysara said. Do not move. Evan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The ship trembled as the energy fields passed over them, their glow intensifying. For a moment, it felt as though the entire vessel might collapse under the strain. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the tremors ceased. We're through, Lysara said, exhaling softly. Evan let out a shaky breath. That was awful. The ship docked silently within the Nexus array, its landing struts hissing as they touched the metal floor. The hangar was vast and eerily quiet, its walls lined with rows of identical ships. Lysara rose from her seat, her movements deliberate. Stay close to me, she said. Evan hesitated. Are you sure about this? She turned to him, her glowing eyes steady. Number but doubt will not help us. Evan swallowed hard, then nodded. Lead the way. Near the interior of the Nexus array was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one more alien and foreboding than the last. The air hummed faintly, as though the station itself were alive. Lysara moved with purpose, her cybernetics glowing faintly in the dim light. Evan followed close behind, his eyes darting nervously to every shadow and corner. What exactly are we looking for? He whispered. The core, Lysara replied. It is the heart of the Nexus array. Destroying it will sever their network and render their operations inert. And how do we destroy it? Lysara didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. The core is shielded. It requires direct physical intervention to overload its systems. Evan frowned. Physical intervention? You mean you? Yes, she said simply. He stopped in his tracks. Wait a second. You're saying you have to, what, sacrifice yourself? She turned to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. It is the only way. Evan felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Number, absolutely not. There has to be another way. There is not, Lysara said firmly. This is my purpose, Evan. My existence was designed for servitude. If I can use it to free others from the same fate, then it will have meaning. Evan shook his head, his chest tightening. That's not fair. You shouldn't have to. I choose this, she interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests. Do not take that choice from me. They reached the core chamber, a vast circular room bathed in pulsating light. At its center stood a towering crystalline structure, its surface alive with shifting patterns of energy. Lysara stepped forward, her movements deliberate. She turned to Evan one last time. "You must leave. Now!" Evan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to argue, to stop her, but he knew it would be futile. "Lysara," he said, his voice breaking, "you don't have to do this." She gave him a faint smile, the first he'd ever seen. "I do, but I thank you, Evan, for showing me there is more to existence than what we are made for." Before he could respond, she turned and stepped into the core. The room erupted in blinding light as the core began to overload. Evan stumbled backward, shielding his eyes as the energy surged around him. He could hear the faint hum of Lysara's systems, growing fainter with each passing second. Then, with a deafening roar, the core shattered. Evan was thrown to the ground, the shockwave rippling through the chamber. When he looked up, the crystalline structure was gone, replaced by a swirling void of light and energy. And Lysara was nowhere to be seen. As the Nexus array began to collapse, Evan stumbled through the corridors, his mind a blur of grief and determination. He made it back to the ship, just as the hangar began to crumble, its walls buckling under the strain. The ship launched into the void, leaving the Nexus array to implode behind it. Evan sat in the cockpit, his hands trembling as he stared at the empty seat beside him. Lysara was gone, but her sacrifice had not been in vain. As the stars stretched out before him, Evan felt a faint, flickering hope. The galactic market's grip had been broken, and somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, freedom was being reclaimed. And though Lysara was gone, her memory would remain, a beacon in the darkness, guiding him forward. The small ship drifted in the void, its engines humming with a quiet persistence. Outside the cockpit window, the stars seemed closer than ever, their light weaving a tapestry of cold beauty. Evan sat in the pilot's chair, his gaze fixed on the expanse, his thoughts as scattered as the galaxies before him. It had been 3 days since the Nexus array's destruction, 3 days since the explosion of light and sound had consumed the station and left the galactic market's network fractured beyond repair. 3 days since Lysara had stepped into the core, her glow swallowed by the crystalline structure as she made her final choice. Evan leaned back, letting the silence of the ship wash over him. The grief was still fresh, raw, but beneath it was a fragile sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. He couldn't go back to the man he was before, a bored tech worker scraping through mundane days. Lysara had shown him a universe vast and unyielding, full of cruelty but also possibility. And now, he owed it to her to do something with the life she had fought to protect. But the first step had been dismantling the galactic market's lingering presence. With the Nexus array gone, the organization's enforcers were disoriented, their operations fragmented. Evan had spent the past few days broadcasting messages to sympathetic factions, sharing the codes Lysara had left in the ship's databanks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sow confusion and give the exploited beings across the galaxy a fighting chance. But even as he worked, questions lingered like shadows. Who had created the galactic market? How far did its roots extend? And most of all, why had such an organization thrived without resistance for so long? The ship's onboard computer chimed softly, pulling Evan from his thoughts. A message had arrived, a reply to one of the signals he'd sent out. He sat up, his heart quickening as he read the text scrolling across the display. To the one who destroyed the array, you are not alone. There are others who seek to end the trade. Come to the following coordinates. Bring proof of your intentions. Trust is rare, but change begins somewhere. The coordinates blinked on the screen, pointing to a remote star system at the edge of known space. Evan hesitated, his mind racing. This could be a trap, or it could be the start of something larger. He exhaled deeply, his fingers brushing over the ship's console. "Lysara," he murmured softly, as if her presence could still hear him. "I hope I'm doing the right thing." The ship turned toward the distant system, its engines flaring as it leapt into hyperspace. The meeting point was a derelict station orbiting a dying star. Its exterior was scarred and battered, evidence of long-abandoned battles. Evan approached cautiously, scanning for signs of life. The sensors picked up a single faint signal, a beacon guiding him to a docking port. The hangar was dimly lit, its walls lined with rusted machinery. Evan stepped out of the ship, his hand resting on the makeshift blaster Lysara had modified for him. The air was heavy with tension, every shadow a potential threat. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, armored being with emerald-green scales and a face obscured by a respirator. Its voice was low and resonant as it spoke. "You are the one who destroyed the Nexus array?" Evan nodded, his grip on the blaster tightening. "I am, but I didn't do it alone." The being tilted its head, studying him. "Proof?" Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out the small memory core Lysara had left him. A fragment of her programming, encoded with the data she had extracted from the market systems. He held it out, and the being took it carefully, examining it with a device attached to its wrist. After a moment, the being looked up. "You speak truth. This data, it reveals horrors beyond imagining. You are brave to come here." Evan swallowed, his voice steady. It wasn't bravery. It was desperation and anger. The being regarded him for a long moment, then extended a hand. "I am Kael'Vir, leader of the Fractured Star, a coalition of those who resist the market. If you are willing, we could use an ally with your resolve." Evan hesitated, memories of Lysara flashing through his mind. Her voice, her determination, her final smile. "I'm in," he said quietly. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Fractured Star operated in the shadows, sabotaging market outposts and liberating those enslaved by its grasp. Evan found himself thrown into a world of danger and rebellion, his skills as a programmer and strategist put to use in ways he had never imagined. But amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet reflection. At night, as the ship sailed through the stars, he would sit by the viewport, the memory core in his hand. He hadn't activated it yet, hadn't dared to. Part of him feared what it might contain. One evening, as the stars stretched endlessly before him, he finally mustered the courage. He inserted the core into the ship's console, and a holographic image flickered to life. It was Lysara. Her form was faint, a ghost of the being he had known, but her voice was clear and steady. "Evan," she said, her gaze locking onto his. "If you are seeing this, then I am no longer with you, but know that my purpose lives on through you. The universe is vast and cruel, but it is also full of those who long for freedom. Fight for them. Fight for what is right." Her image flickered, her final words hanging in the air. "And remember, you are not alone." Evan sat in silence, his heart heavy but resolute. As the Fractured Star grew stronger, so did Evan's sense of purpose. He was no longer the aimless man who had stumbled across the galactic market's dark web in the dead of night. He was a fighter, a liberator, a symbol of defiance in a galaxy desperate for change. And though Lysara was gone, her spirit remained, a beacon guiding him through the darkness. The stars stretched on, endless and unyielding. And for the first time, Evan felt ready to face them.